had people elevate it. Like nobody's ever done too much. And I thought it was funny when you're talking about the main character is you. When I wrote my first feature film, I made the main character like the my best friend, the guy that I wanted to cast for that role because I was like, man, it would just be so easy. He wouldn't really have to act. It's just him. And I did that for a couple other of my friends to make it. It almost made it easier. So it was kind of an ode to my childhood, that feature film. But no, I've only had people ever elevate production either because I planned it that way in a sneaky, subversive way, or they're just great actors and actresses.
So when an actor gets reads their sides or gets into a part, I'm always pleased when they connect with a character or they have a different point of view of the character to help embody that character and portray them on screen. And I love when actors have questions, because I do my work on my part of the screenplay of fleshing out the character, and a lot of the time I will have like a small dossier for the actors to kind of give, like, just for them, just between me and them, just so that they have kind of an idea of like, okay, here's a little bit more deeper stuff for you to kind of dig into, so you can tap into that while we're prepping for the scene or prepping for the film or whatnot. That's something that I learned in a creative writing class, and that translated into when I did some acting, like for college, just because I wanted to know what it's like to be directed by somebody else, so that way I can direct better in my own stuff.
And anytime I've ever had an actor that wasn't, that was, perhaps overdoing something. I hate to use the word overdoing, but if there was an actor that, wasn't quite hitting the note or was reaching too far to find that performance, it's really, actors are people. You can have a conversation with them. You can just bring them down and say, okay, I see what you're doing there. What is the foundation for that? Where do you think that's coming from? And they might have a point that I may not have thought about. Or if I'm like, well, I don't know if I agree with that. I think that we might want to think about it this way. And then you have that dialogue, and you get into those questions. I just had that experience both ways on the play that I just directed last year. And I had actors, some were like, were needed to be informed of what their character's, conflict and arc was.
Even if you're talking about those PAs, they're building skills, they're building connections, yeah, they're probably getting overworked a little bit, but they are gaining something from it, even if, it's a little exploitative. So it's definitely gets interesting when you're talking about those people that were interviewed, though, for those narrative films.
Hey everyone, this is Abhi from No-Budget Filmmaking Podcast, and here with me are Dave, Sam, and Jen. Hello guys.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey there.
Okay, so for our audience, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Who wants to go first?
You.
Okay.
You spoke
Me?
first.
All right, sounds good. All right, I'm Sam VerMerris. I just graduated high school. I'm 18. I live in Michigan. An aspiring director. Right now, just kind of dipping my toes in all the water, gaining as much experience as I can.
That's amazing. Next to you, Dave.
All right. I'm Dave Nelson. I'm a director located in San Diego, California. I write, produce, and direct, and cinematography, the whole thing. Just trying to do more this year of that.
Yes, absolutely. We wish you luck on that. What about you, Jen?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jan David Soutar. I am a writer, director, playwright, and producer based out of Los Angeles, originally from Baltimore, Maryland. And I am, really honored to be with this group and really excited to talk to everybody and hear everybody's perspectives.
Yeah.
So you're just asking like what my experience was on my first project, doing all that stuff.
Yes, and what did you learn from it essentially?
What I learned from like what I thought was different. Um, my first project, oh my gosh, I'll start in high school because I started doing it when I was like 12 and it was not anything to be proud of right now. I just it was crazy how much mental energy went into it. I thought you could kind of just say, I'm gonna point the camera here and you're gonna say the line and do this. Oh my gosh. There's so much that goes into it. And it's like after that first project, I was like, you need a group of people. It takes a village. And before I thought it was something you could kind of just do on your own if you really wanted to do it, but that's absolutely not the case for making something great.
Yeah, I started in the same kind of way of just in high school was really starting to do a lot of work and where I was introduced to filmmaking and video and stuff. And it's a fun time doing it, but it's very much this similar way. It's just it's a lot of planning. You don't realize how much planning is in it until you're actually doing it. And it's also kind of like remembering a dream, kind of, and you're trying to get it in from your head into the physical real world. 3D space and time is of the essence for a lot of it. Um, and it's just each one, each thing that you do, you get better at it and you find things, okay, I know what to do better next time, or I know what to account for next time. Or sometimes all that goes out the window and you just have to make something up, and it's usually the stuff that you make up that you're not thinking about is usually the best stuff that you go with. So
Yeah.
Oh man, I have a roundabout way of like answering this question because I started off as an actor. I had been acting for probably about 12 to 15 years by the time I made my first project and directed it. So I'd already had like a lot of experience in acting, but whenever it came to directing, I mean, I actually it's really kind of like funny because I just went and found my very first project that I made 11 years ago in 2014, and it was a film. It was basically I was trying to write something to get myself on a TV show on Cinemax called Banshee, and so I wrote a scene with me, my then girlfriend, now wife who's an amazing actor, and a friend of mine, Gavin Peretti, who is no longer with us, may he rest. And I wrote it, and I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, I can do this. I'm an actor. No, no, no. What is a shot list? So like I didn't have a shot list. I wound up having a great DP. I really appreciated the DP for kind of like helping me out. I still talk to him. He's a great guy, Time Colley. And you know, it, I knew that it always took I kind of like understood that it took a village, but you're totally right. You never know exactly how deep that village needs to be in order to make all of those things happen. And what I really took away from it was the 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 mental acuity that it takes not only to direct yourself but to direct actors and also to trust that what you're doing on screen while you're acting and thinking about the scene and thinking about the edit, all of those together, what all of that takes to do it on a basically a 2 day shoot to get a 3 minute short film, right? And so that was kind of like my first experience in directing, and I didn't direct again until 4 years later, whenever in 2018, whenever I directed my first college short film, whenever I went to Los Angeles City College for my first, from really a class project, and learned a lot again. It's like I learned the whole thing all over again because this time I wasn't actually acting in it. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and also one more thing that sometimes when we write stuff for thinking about sometimes, okay, let's just say it. Every person who writes thinks that the main character is them. Everyone writes the way. So that's a different story. But when actors get involved, the scenes sometimes change because sometimes actors, if they're really good actors, you change the scene and you change the meaning of the scene while the actor is doing their thing. Does this happen to you when sometimes an actor elevates a scene and sometimes they just uh, gets back to the ground. I mean, take it down a notch, if that makes sense.
Um, are we going the same order? Okay. Um, I've only I'm the youngest person here, so I don't want to claim to be having all this experience or anything. But I've only had people elevate it like nobody's ever done too much. And I thought it was funny when you're talking about the main character is you. When I wrote my first feature film, I made the main character like the my best friend, the guy that I wanted to cast for that role because I was like, man, it would just be so easy. He wouldn't really have to act. It's just him. And I did that for a couple other of my friends to make it almost made it easier. So it was kind of an ode to my childhood, that feature film. But no, I've only had people ever elevate production either because I planned it that way in a sneaky, subversive way, or they're just great actors and actresses, much more than I could have ever been or planned for.
Yeah, I think acting in a lot of ways, acting is just another form of storytelling. So when an actor gets reads their sides or gets into a part, I'm always pleased when they connect with a character or they have a different point of view of the character to help embody that character and portray them on screen. And I love when actors have questions because I do my work on my part of the screenplay of fleshing out the character, and a lot of the time I will have like a small dossier for the actors to kind of give like just for them, just between me and them, just so that they have kind of idea of like, okay, here's a little bit more deeper stuff for you to kind of dig into, so you can tap into that while we're, you know, prepping for the scene or prepping for the film or whatnot. That's something that I learned in a creative writing class, and that translated into when I did some acting, like for college, just because I wanted to know what it's like to be directed by somebody else, so that way I can help, or so that way I can direct better in my own stuff. And I think that's a valuable aspect for any filmmaker is to enroll in an acting class, so you get that other side of the camera or other side of the directing aspect of it in any creative kind of capacity. But to get back on track to the question, it's always led to interesting conversations, whether it's pre-production or during production, and even after too, just to kind of because you discover more before, during, and after. Kind of like, oh, they played it this way, or it's coming off this way to the audience that I didn't expect it to. So there's always many different levels of that, which is always fun to think about and talk about and kind of like bring to the next project that you do.
Yeah, following up with what Dave said, it's really about the discovery process. I think that I lucked out in a lot of ways because of being an actor and doing it for a while. My wife just reminded me that video, that my first short that I ever made actually wound up getting me booked on that show too. So I wound up being able to, kind of capitalize on that. And because of, my background in acting and like different systems of, because everybody that says that like are method acting, but all acting is method acting. There's always a method to whatever you're doing. So whether it's Meisner or Stanislavski or Hagen or whatever that method or system might be, that really gave me a good foundation to understand where an actor might be coming from, so that if I encountered an actor where we were running into an issue with the scene where I was like, we're not quite getting there, I was already familiar with the language. I was already familiar with the techniques. It was really about, like, as Dave said, getting into the questions. You love actors that ask questions. Even if you don't have the answer for them, it's great that they're asking because they're thinking deeply about the scene. Whenever you have an actor that you need to like raise up, it's great to, so if you know kind of like the way that they work, you can then you can build into that system and say, okay, let's think about it this way. Let's think about it that way. If it's like somebody who is more familiar with Hagen or has like a Hagen kind of Uta Hagen kind of style, you can understand that they need to be more grounded in the physical reality of the scene. Whereas if it's somebody that's more familiar with Meisner technique or something of that nature, you're much more in tune with the fact that they need to be grounded into that other actor. The other actor is the thing that they need to play off of. And maybe it's not the direction you need to give to the actor that needs to be raised. It's you got to push the other actor to push them into whatever you might need. And it's also sometimes about the blocking. Sometimes you're just not staging your actors in a way that is emotionally tense enough for them, or has enough emotional conflict. And so, those can definitely be tools. There's the saying, tools, not rules. And anytime I've ever had an actor that wasn't, that was, perhaps overdoing something, I hate to use the word overdoing, but if there was an actor that, wasn't quite hitting the note or was reaching too far to find that performance, it's really, actors are people. You can have a conversation with them. You can just bring them down and say, okay, I see what you're doing there. What is the foundation for that? Where do you think that's coming from? And they might have a point that I may not have thought about. Or if I'm like, well, I don't know if I agree with that. I think that we might want to think about it this way. And then you have that dialogue, and you get into those questions. I just had that experience both ways on the play that I just directed last year. And I had actors, some were like, were needed to be informed of what their character's, conflict and arc was. And some had read it wrong and were going a different direction. And you need to go, oh, okay, all right. So this is the way that we should be playing this, because that's going to wind up feeding into this scene later, or into this emotion later, more succinctly. So yeah, I think that it's really, the strength is knowing, what the actors are capable of, kind of how they might work, or how they see the character, how they see their own technique or themselves. I've and really thinking about how you're going to block them for those scenes so that they can hit those beats too.
Mm. And also, just to follow up on what Jan said, I feel like when there's one more thing is that when there's some good actor in front of you who's acting his or hers or them there's ass off, and other actors get motivated too, and they basically that actor brings out a really good performance in others too. So there's that. And one more thing I wanted to add to what Jen said is like you can be good actors, but you can be bad for the scene. Have you guys felt that? Like, for example, if we, for, let's say, for Jan's play, it was a farce, it was a comedy, and we cannot have uh, all kinds of acting there. Sometimes we have to do what we call it overdoing or something like that. So that's what I felt. I'm not sure if you guys agree or not.
What's the question there then? You're just asking if like the actors in the certain types of scene. Like I'm probably
Okay,
not.
let's change it a bit. Like what kind of themes and what kind of style you kind of lean into? I know it's really young for you, it's really
Oh
new for you,
yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Um, oh my gosh, that's that's a great question, and I've had people ask me that. I think I work because it's been me just a lot behind the camera. I'm in a grounded sense. I place the tripod somewhere and I have the camera just kind of sit there. Um, I think that's kind of flowed into how I direct people. Like be realistic. In every situation, I've had them just be realistic, even if the situation is so crazy and like weird. I just want them to act like people. And that's been up till this point. Who knows how it'll go from there, but I'm interested to hear what these guys got to say about that.
Um, it's interesting for a lot of my projects, there it kind of goes with, I mean, all my projects are very genre oriented. One of my first one was like a World War II semi documentary kind of thing, dramatized documentary kind of thing. So a lot of it had to do with, getting, it was only two actors, one an American soldier, one a Wehrmacht, like a sniper, like a German sniper, like an SS sniper. And so we had to get authentic military gear for that. So, and I had my best friend, he was the American soldier. I had him dig a foxhole. So that was like for him to like know what it was, but the dirt was too hard, so we all kind of had to help and dig a foxhole for that. So that was kind of a pain in the ass. So that felt real. And I know he's able to use that exhaustion for that and being alone and isolated. So I like giving actors the opportunity to kind of live in the wardrobe for a bit and kind of do something in the wardrobe for a bit. On the follow-up, on a different, on the next film that I did, it was this gritty street, like kind of like Guy Ritchie meets Robert Rodriguez kind of film. So it had to do with gangsters and like mafia kind of stuff, but in the San Fernando Valley. And so we had, my co-director, producer, and cinematographer dress up like a street punk, and then my best friend get a mohawk, and they had facial tattoos and everything, and they walked around like this for the entire day. And even after we filmed, because we would film during dusk and everything, and then we would go home. So both of them went off home. They both had to like go to the gas station and everything. Nobody would look them in the eye. Even if they did catch them, like in their eyes or anything like that, their people would turn away and be afraid of them and everything. So they really embodied that aspect of the characters. So I like doing that with my actors because get them in the world, get them to really wear it, because I think that helps, psychologically and just get them into whatever world that they need to be into. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I would follow right up on that too. Like I completely with Dave. I think again, I'm probably throwing out a lot of names that like some folks may or may not know just because I'm familiar with them. But like Uta Hagen, that's a very Hegelian thing to do is really kind of ground your actors into the scene. I absolutely love doing that with my actors. I think that it is crucial to get them as invested as early and as frequently as possible into the world that they're occupying. I think that my style really, if I had a directing style, it kind of changes depending on like the play I just directed was farcical and a satire, and it was historical lyrical musical. So it took a very different style than I had ever directed before. I had never directed a musical. It was one that I had written, so it was very different. And the film I had done before that was a 1950s piece. It was a melodrama and so that required a whole different type. And I wound up working with an extremely talented group of actors there, and then before that, it was, actors that were working on, it was a scene that was, or rather a short film that was working on a spoken word premise. It was kind of experimental. And so it was more about reaction than it was about like dialogue or line delivery. But we also had to record a voiceover for that. So then you also have to, direct voiceover and how you want to, push your actors through that so that it's not, you're not tropish or corny, you're, you're really hitting the emotional notes that you want. And so I find that if there's a thing that like I really try not to do is results oriented directing. I try not to say like, I would need you to be sadder or I need you to be this or that because then the actor is playing a note that typically you may not even really want. I much prefer to give like adverbs to an actor if I need to. But really, like for me, it's questions, it's discussion. And On the day, if you're directing on the day, if you've had the opportunity to rehearse, amazing. I always recommend rehearsal. Rehearsal is like where you make such discovery. But if it's on the day and you've never had the opportunity to work with the actor before and you're kind of getting to know each other and how you work on the day, then it really is grounding them. And it really is also letting them know that you are there, you are their biggest fan, and you are there to help them to achieve, the performance that you both need and that the scene requires.
So the follow-up would be when you stop directing. When do you stop directing? Like,
Um, oh boy. I would usually stop directing after that's a great question because I usually give one direction and then I just keep getting takes and it generally morphs um to what I want if I just keep saying like what the intention is. Like I love when he brought up the don't do the result based thing. Like that always struck me as corny. You just say be sadder because sadness comes in so many different forms. How can someone just know what you're talking about? So I just like doing a bunch of different takes, and especially if it's something that's crazy, or it's supposed to be funny. The absurdity of doing so many takes gets it to that level sometimes.
Let's see, I like to say I at least like to do at least two to three that are exactly by the book, exactly how it's written, and then perhaps maybe a couple that are, just reactionary towards what the actors are feeling in a scene. Also, too, it's just sometimes my really like my main background before I started doing more narrative type stuff was documentaries. So I love just kind of exploring that aspect of it and seeing like what's the actor going to do, or what are the characters of them going to do in a situation. A lot of the times, we'll go out in the world and just kind of see how things play out. For that gritty short film called The Faded Line, what we did with with the actor, with the main character, we bloodied him up. We made him look like he got the shit kicked out of him because this is a big fight scene where he fights the two punks. And we just like, all right, let's go and film in the car and get people's reactions. And that's exactly what we did. I'm like, I just had the camera and then the car, we're walking around, we're just trying to get stuff out of them. I mean, it's in the scenes in the script, but we just went out and guerrilla filmed it just to see if like what we can get. And that was not rehearsed or anything. That was just kind of like, let's just see what we can get. And I like doing that type of stuff, especially when it's that visceral. And I want reactions from people that aren't necessarily associated with the film, but are in the world. If that makes sense. I'm very much of the thing of kind of like making making the environment or making the setting a character just as much as the actors are playing characters. So I like doing stuff like that. I think I'm kind of going off on a tangent here. Sorry about that, but it's just making me think about crazy things that I've done with my actors. Nothing illegal, but just crazy stuff in the sense of just to try and break up the rhythm or trying to break up their comfortability a little bit and seeing what happens, you know?
Keep going, keep going. I want to know if you have anything else.
Oh, yeah, let's see. I mean, sometimes we'll just I don't know. It's kind of interesting in the sense of like, yeah, I don't like result based either because it's like I know what's written, but sometimes what's written isn't necessarily what's right for the moment. So I oftentimes I'll give like a take or I'll tell to my say to my actor, hey, if this were you, what would you do? Like in this situation, like what would you do in this situation? In this moment with the emotions and everything that's kind of like leading up to this point, what would you do in it? And we'll do a take like that sometimes, or even one time I was a cinematographer on this one, but I helped a lot in like prepping it and getting set up and everything. There was we had this it was a scene where guys in a prison cell. We're doing two actors, two different actors, so they're kind of sharing the same experience, but we're switching the actors out. So we had this one actor who was just kind of waiting for a very long time. And I told him, I'm like, hey man, just kind of hang out in here. Just pretend like you're in isolation. Pretend like you're locked up. Pretend like you're kind of like living through it. And we kind of get through the day and everything. And we forgot about him. We completely forgot. So he's been locked away figuratively and literally for about an hour and a half. So by the time like we're ready to get them, this is when we were using the college I used to tutor at. I was a video tutor, so we had access to this kind of courtyard area. It looked like a prison, just because it's very brutalist, kind of like cement, and just
Okay.
it looked like a prison. So we switch out the one actor who's been in it for the past 2 hours or so, and we get the guy in there that's been isolated, prepping for his scene, and we're set up, we're ready. It's a Saturday. Nobody really knows that we're there. We have permission to be there from my from my boss. And the director yells action, and this dude lets out the most blood-curdling, visceral scream I've ever heard in close proximity to myself. And he slams his foot against the wall. It's just so loud and crazy, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna get fired. So in that instance, I think that's something that's kind of, I don't know, dialing into to a different side. So I don't know. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, when that's a great question. When do I stop directing? If I'm thinking about it honestly, like I don't know that I do until the end of the day. Because I'm really as a director, at least this is the way I kind of see the job, is that I am keyed into all the departments. I'm not just with the actors, I'm with camera, I'm with sound. Like everything kind of needs to fit into a puzzle piece just right. And if it's more than 1 day shoot, or if we're doing a play, or especially if doing a play, you're gonna do notes at the end of it. And so you're going to give notes, you're going to give feedback, whether that's individual notes or group note. But also, more to the point, I think that the reason I say that you really don't is because I am a fan of everybody on set. So I kind of like see it as like a head coach kind of thing. And so, until everybody clears the building, you are the coach. You're there to like cheer everybody on, to direct people where they might need to go or how they might want to think of something, and also take feedback. Like, oh, okay, that's a great idea. Great, let's go. I mean, like, I think that that is kind of a skill set of collaboration. But I it's a really interesting question. When do I stop directing? I think that like I try not to get in the way of the actor. Absolutely try not to get in the way of the actor. Um, there's some actors that do need a very light touch. There's some actors that need a heavier touch. And I think that as you kind of develop your skill set, especially as an actor, like as an actor, you kind of get a sense of whenever you can push, when you can, and when you should and when you shouldn't. And so I I think that even in like a light touch, not really giving the actor very some that's directing. You're expecting, even though you're not "Well, do this, do that," but your presence, just your presence there, and your eye is kind of still always directing. And so it's kind of a really interesting question of when do I stop? But I think that I I I don't think film related. I don't think I stop directing until the film hits the festival or if it hits wherever. But I would also say that I'm not trying to be, I'm never trying to get in the way of the actor. I'm never trying to get in the way of the camera. I'm there to push the vision and push the emotion to where it needs to be. And if it doesn't need to be pushed and I can just sit back and let it happen, that's gorgeous. Then my job as the director is to be the audience. I think that I am. It's a funny term, but I consider myself kind of like an audience supremacist. I want to think about the audience so deeply and so like I just always am thinking about what is the if I am the audience and I'm the first person seeing this, what am I feeling? And really being in tune with that. And I think that that is also directing, and at least to me is because ultimately you're going to have to take whatever it is that you see that you were so like, yes, that's what I like, and then go to your editor and say, all right, cool, here's what we've got, and you're then working with your editor and really kind of uh, creating a dialogue between you two towards that. And sometimes your editor puts together a scene and you're like, that's not quite there. I think that this needs to go that or whatever have you. And I don't know. It's an interesting question. When do you stop directing? I don't think that I stop until the film is cut and it's got a DCP going. you know?
Yeah. Or even in the festival, you're trying to direct, like, okay, let's edit this part out, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are times where I've screened things at festivals and I'm going, oh, that didn't get, even in performance too. Like whenever you're doing a theater play, you'll think that like, a scene will work or a line's gonna work and it won't. And you're like, ah, okay, all right, need to fix that. Or the it gets a laugh in a place you didn't realize, and you can see how you can build off of that even further to really accentuate a perhaps a weaker spot and say, okay, this worked there. Maybe there's a way of carrying it further into a next thing. Maybe I've got a little hook there. Maybe I've built myself a little stool to reach for a higher emotional note in another place that I didn't realize I had.
That's interesting. I'll ask about the audience portion of the things that you said later. But so on the other side, when do you become a dictator? That I want this exactly, and you have to do it. I don't know, but is there a point of time when you have to do that?
I think you become a dictator right at the beginning. I think, like Dave said, get what you wrote down, and then I like to just say, like, let's do some jazz. Like from there, you know, let's see what we can make. You've got ideas. It's a creative collaboration. Actors are creative people too. So, like, I just at the beginning for me.
Yeah. I'd say I'd say follow the storyboards. Like I'm all about the storyboards these days. Like just because, especially in shot list, if those have or got to have things, and I will hold out until we get them all, and then we can play around and have fun. And then even still, it's just like within the edit as well, I would say, um, is the same kind of thing. It's just we have to have this moment, or even inserts, just like just to be safe. I'm not sure if this will be conveyed enough for the audience, so let's get some insert shots just so that way we can have something to cut to or to emphasize on a particular part of the script or the story. um, but yeah, I would say in those instances, for follow the shot list and the storyboard, which is something I didn't used to do before. I would just kind of go with, all right, here's the script. This is what needs to happen. Let's kind of figure it out right now, while everybody's here. And that works sometimes, but a lot of the time it just wastes time. And I feel that I have gotten a lot better with my productions of like, nope, it needs to be this way. And once we get this way, we can have more leniency on other things that we can kind of try out. So I think that's for sure the storyboards and the shot list dictate everything on the day.
So, yeah. So when do you start and stop, or when do you start being a dictator? Well, I think that what I was saying earlier was that, like, filmmaking is not a democracy, but it is. I try not to make it a dictatorship. It's hierarchical, as my wife likes to say. If I'm being a real nerd about it, it's like a monarchical aristocracy. But I think that it really is about putting yourself with the right team, so you don't really have to be a dictator unless there's something unsafe. I think I'm only really ever dictatorial whenever I see something that is unsafe, or if there's something that's like, okay, guys, we can't do that. Not going to do that. That is going to be harmful to someone, some way, some shape, some form. Usually, I try not to, because I'd much rather have a first AD that I love and trust, and I let them be the dictator. Because that always seems to be way smarter in the long run. Because then nobody, that just takes the stress off of you for that. You've got somebody who's got safety in mind. You've got somebody who has got, all of those kind of different perspectives that you've already communicated about. They're in communication with the team. They're thinking about all those things. Because I don't know, yeah, I really like having a good, strong relationship with my first AD. And if I don't have that, if I'm working with a first AD for the first time, it is, a moral imperative for me to, before the actors show up, before anybody shows up, to have at least a long phone call with a first AD to explain like how you like to direct, what you're looking to do, what you expect, what your safety concerns are, what your overall concerns are about all of it. And that way, whenever there is an issue, you already have that kind of set up so you don't have to be a dictator. You can just be a collaborator.
Yeah, that's thank you for your answer, Jen. And thank you everyone, Dave, Sam. So my next question would be Jen earlier brought up a point of being like an audience shoe in a way, or an audience supremacist as he used to put it. But when we have some our own film, right, we are biased in kind of way because it's our baby and it can do nothing wrong. So how do we not being okay, I get the first part of being a director is having a good taste, but sometimes people have their own biases, and we see that happen with some movies when directors have full control and it just got way worse in a way. Like,
Yeah, I've had this issue a lot. Like this is something that I've really had to learn, and then now I recognize it with people I've started to work with. People that support you, that love you, but love you enough to say, "What are you doing?" Is like the most important thing. Like my mom, oh my gosh, that first short film, she was like, "That didn't make any sense. Why did everyone have to die at the end?" And I was like, okay, and now I was a little hurt. But everything I've made since then has been a little more made more sense, first of all, and a little more wholesome. It didn't require people dying to be like, whoa, something happened in this one. It was like there was actual story and substance to it, which I'm very thankful for her saying something. Um, uh, that leads to you then realizing it and other people that just are right now. I'm editing a short film. And right at the beginning, I could tell like this guy had this cool idea, but it doesn't make sense in a story. It's just a cool concept. And that's something I've been trying to get away from. Having a good story, and then you can have a cool concept. But maybe the cool concept fuels the good story, and then you apply it. I'm just a big Christopher Nolan guy, so I love the concepts. So just get it away from that, I think.
No, I I love concept too. I love high concept ideas, and I think I think that's why I love genre films so much, or just things, especially sci-fi. If I could live in sci-fi and creating and staying in that world, I would do it 100%. Um, I think there's a balance that has to be struck, you know. Otherwise you're gonna stray too far from it. And even in that, even within the concept, you can discover a lot of different things. You can discover more story. You can discover a way in, more than what you initially thought of, which is always fun to have that moment of, aha, I know what this is about now. And you can kind of, you know, tread through the waters more confidently. Um, what's interesting about developing story with concept, or having that good idea, or having like, oh, this would be a really neat thing. I'm working on something right now that's kind of in that same vein, and I'm trying to work through, okay, it's a good idea, but what's the story? You have to find the story within it. And that's also the great thing about filmmaking and movies and stories in general, is that everyone is going to have a different point of view of it. You're going to have your own because you're so close to it, but then there's going to be other people that are going to see things that you didn't and have the intention of it being what other people see it as. and it's no longer yours anymore. It's other people's. Very much why people are so, um, at least at the time with George Lucas and Star Wars, it's why people were so, it was so close to people because it was no longer his anymore. It was everybody else's. It was ours. And then, prequels, sequels, all that kind of stuff happened. But that's very much kind of like something so powerful in pop culture becomes the zeitgeist of the entire world, or at least in filmmaking or storytelling. Um, Kind of like how Joker became its own thing, and like how you were saying, is just like it was, it made $1 billion at the box office for a anti-hero, Joker, taxi driver, king of comedy kind of film, with, comic book dressing on it. And then it goes and becomes, another Martin Scorsese movie that wasn't very successful, New York, New York. So it's a interesting way of how that happened. And then for Coppola with Megalopolis, that guy, he, I mean, his earlier work is incredible, but I'm of the, he did, well, he kind of lost his way a little bit after, let's say, after Outsiders, Rumblefish, and I think the last kind of nail in the coffin, even before Godfather 3 or after Godfather 3, was Jack. Which is so funny because he said that that was the most fun that he ever had on a set, and it was such a commercial bomb. But I think if he, I think he was kind of wanting, probably hoping to make Megalopolis after Jack, perhaps, and then it just kind of got away from him, and he just he spent his own money to do it, and if I had my own money to do what I wanted to do, I'd probably do the same thing too. So I can't really fault him for having that much, wanting that much vision and that much passion of something to do it, because I mean, what does he have to prove, honestly? I mean, he made The Godfather and Godfather Part 2 and Apocalypse Now. I mean, this is not unheard of territory where he's been before, where the film or the lore or the legend of the film is bigger than the director or bigger than the production. So, yeah, I honestly think it's a fine line to balance, and I think in where we're at, we're not in the echelons of the heights of directors who are commercially successful. Well, we have nothing to lose. So I think when you don't have anything to lose, you can be bold and kind of be out there and do something that is gonna set yourself apart. I think it's only when you get higher up and when serious money is involved that you kind of have to steer more in the direction of, is this commercially viable? Is this more of like what the audience is kind of going for? Just because of how things are now, theatrically and streaming, it's just such a different world. I mean, there's that memo that went out to writers, screenwriters, and like, can you make these films or can you make the dialogue kind of describing what's happening in the scene, even though we're seeing what's happening in the scene for streaming, so that way people can watch the show or movie on the background. They don't have to really watch it. It's not really the kind of movie I want to watch. And it's interesting in the sense of I did a watch last year of 365 films, and a lot of the films that I watched were from the 40s and 50s, and they don't really tell you anything. You have to watch the film and you have to watch the story to know what's going on, and it's kind of we're missing that, and I think I would like to hope that we start to go back towards that, especially with so many voices in film now and so many opportunities for people to make things now. Like Sam, I love that you're doing this at your age, man. Like I was doing the same thing too, but I'm so happy for filmmakers like yourself because there are so many more tools now that make it so much more accessible for young filmmakers to really go out there and do something special. And I think that's awesome. And I want more people to do that. So sorry for the tangent. I just wanted to I wanted to answer the question, but also kind of dig into some other things that are kind of adjacent to what the question was.
Yeah. Just want to make sure you guys can hear me and see me coming through. Great. I think that you hit on some really interesting points that I absolutely agree with, Dave. And I also echo what you say about Sam, like starting at such a young age and really kind of getting that experience. I think that with, some directors that wind up going a little off of what the audience expectation is. Um, you have those megalopolises, and I think that like truly right, like that's the film he wanted to make, and he made the film he wanted to make, and I respect the hell out of that. I think about like the way that M. Night Shyamalan chooses his movie. He funds it completely himself and then makes the movie he wants to make and then finds the distribution. And it used to be much different in the way it is now. Now, as you said, it is streaming and there are streamings. What is theatrical distribution even like anymore? It doesn't even exist for most filmmakers, except unless it's at a film festival, and that's not really theatrical distribution. Some people floor wall, which I don't think is necessarily a great idea, but sometimes it can be very helpful to get your stuff out there. I think about distribution a lot, a lot, a lot, a lot, because I think that the moment you start making your feet, especially around features, the moment you start making your film, you should be even writing, you should be thinking about your marketing. Roger Corman said that has this great line: "Why make a movie if you don't have a campaign? Why make a movie if you don't have a campaign? What are you going to do with it?" And so I think that you have those directors that are absolutely able to kind of take their style and sell it. And then as time goes on, perhaps they don't have that mom like Sam has that tells them like, "Honey, what are we doing here? It's not going very well." And sometimes I, I've tried not to be guilty of. Again, I'm always trying to put myself in the space of the audience. I have seen bad edits and that I've made, and I'm like, okay, God, no, 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 no. I might need to actually help here. I might actually need to bring in an editor because I don't know if I can see the forest from the trees. And I think that it takes a lot of honesty to be honest with yourself in that regard because it happens. It happens. Sometimes you do need somebody to come in and say, okay, what is this trying to do here? What is that trying to do there? But I also wanted to touch on what you said about genre, Dave, because I think that you make a really, really good point that, you know, genre informs so much of what the audience expectation is going to be. If you're making a horror, if you're making a comedy, if you're making a drama, whatever that, is, or if you're making a musical, your audience is going to have an expectation. And if you may be able to subvert those expectations and still win them over, but that's, a risky thing to do. I kind of like that idea of risk personally. I've always loved like kind of subverting the audience and then giving them something they didn't even know they wanted. I think that's one of the great things about filmmaking is it's kind of a magic trick that way, where you're pulling you're saying look over here at this thing and then this other thing. Look at what Ryan Johnson did with Brick. Totally a great film that was a noir genre. The audience knew what they were getting, and yet it was set in a high school kind of situation. Completely subverting the noir expectations, but yet still using the tropes. And I think that it really genre informs so much of what we train ourselves and our taste in what we see and think about films that we make. But I also think that I totally agree. I don't. This brings on like a conversation that I might be a little side railed, but I think that there's a big difference between cinema and content. And I don't want to make content. I hate content. Not to hate it, like somebody else can make it cool, rock on. For me, it feels like a travesty. I don't want to make content. I want to make art. I want to make cinema. And while that might sound hoity-toity, that is what it is. Like that is where I'm coming from. There are stories that I want to tell that have a very specific philosophical reason for me wanting to tell them. I am a very big philosophical thinker. I like thinking about thinking while I'm thinking. Um, and so I think that whenever you are looking at films where, whether it's your film, another person's film, where it's kind of gone off to a direction you were like, oh, I didn't want it to go there. Or if you can't see that it's gone off, then that to me says that either you are looking to achieve something that the audience may not be, you may have subverted yourself too far. And that's why a good editor is your best friend. And should really get to know your editor and get to know their taste and have long conversations about taste in film. The first thing I like to talk to my editor about is what are your favorite movies? What movies don't you like? Because if the editor is a good editor, but they don't like, situational comedies, then you don't want to put them in charge of your farce. You don't want that. You want somebody that's like, oh, I love this. Oh, and then we can connect this, and then you're having that conversation. The editor of Braveheart is not necessarily going to be the person that you're going to have edit Airplane. You know, so you really got to think about like your taste and what the tropes of the genre. Like I think that like trope can be a dirty word, but I think it's also a very useful tool. So again, I think that like if you take something like I didn't say the second Joker, so I don't really have a comment on that. I didn't see Megalopolis, I don't really have a comment on that. But thinking again about M. Night Shyamalan, The Sixth Sense was genius. I thought that, however, Signs didn't really quite hit for me. And there are some other films that he made that I was like, I don't quite know what you're doing. But there are also moments within those movies that I love, that I was like, oh, that's genius. I love the way that you did this. You blocked this, where the way you staged the camera here, things like that. And so I think that it really boils down to the medium in which you're telling the story and the genre in which you're telling the story and the audience's expectations of it. And, you know, it's it really is kind of like helpful to have somebody or have, in the back of your mind what what you think the audience is going to expect, because we can get so focused on, this is so cool, I want to do that, and then the coolness factor gets lost, or it doesn't really have any substance to it because the story itself isn't there, and it doesn't really tell the story that you're looking for because you're so hung up on concept. I love high concept. I live for high concept, but I also completely know that the concept does not, it's always about the story. It's the story, the story, the story, the story, the story. The story is everything. And then after that, it's casting. And then, from there, camera and really staging and blocking in order to put yourself and more importantly, your audience in the right frame. We talk about frame of mind, but putting them in the right frame of the story so that they know what they're kind of getting into and they're along with that ride. And then they will give you the permission to subvert where it is. But if you're so locked into the concept and the concept overrules the story, then typically what you're going to have is a very flat or uninspired or worse, poorly structured story that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to them.
So, two things that this conversation sparked my interest in some ways is one of the things is concept versus the story, which we see a lot. For example, if I have to take a vote, just raise a hand. How many of you seen all the Avatar series, all the three movies, or at least one of them?
Two of them.
Okay, perfect. Um,
I saw
okay.
one. I saw the first one. I haven't seen the other two.
Okay. So did you rewatch it?
I've seen Avatar, the first Avatar, 3 or 4 times, I think, because I was really interested in how not only the production value, but also like the techniques they use, because there's so many. James Cameron is really big into thinking about the audience and even down to their brain waves and the way that their neurons fire whenever they're watching images and what that's going to do and where do you go motion technology in a way that the audience is going to be able to register it. And I think that that kind of level of thinking is right up my alley. I think it's really, really fun. So yeah.
Uh,
You know, if I can chime in real quick, I'm sorry to take. I think that you make a really good point because I think that that is a roller coaster of a movie, right? It's much more like a roller coaster ride. Whereas if I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie, the Russian film Come and See. And if you haven't, go watch that movie immediately. Oh my gosh. But Come and See affected me so deeply. Affected me so deeply. A Russian war movie about World War II seen through this little boy's eyes who is like pulled into to fight on the Russian front. And that movie like just broke me in so many ways. So I completely understand what you're saying, Avi. Like it really is more of an it really kind of like it grabs you and won't let you go. Whereas whenever I'm watching Avatar, I'm watching it for the cool factor, right? I'm watching it for like the roller coaster ride that it's going to give me. I feel like I'm on a ride at like, Universal or Disney or something like that, as compared to a film that really just grabs me by the throat and by the heart and maybe some other parts and won't let me go because it refuses for me to look away. I think that's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, that's what I was saying before my roommate starts yelling. But yeah, for I was the movie that I was about to mention was It's a Wonderful Life. Like it didn't had anything more technical, but you feel so much, right? And Avatar, on the other hand, it's amazing in a way, but I don't connect a lot. Even though I know the themes there, the environment, helping people, save the planet, and be close to the animals, but yeah, I feel more for the John Wick's dog than when certain animals die because I'm more in the awe of the things because the concept and the technology takes over so much that you know what I mean? You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I get what you mean. I've seen the first. I think I saw the first one a couple times just because it's just never seen anything like it, especially 3D use in that type of way of the depth and everything. And you know what's funny is I thought the second one was probably better than the first one because I felt that there was more story development um, and character development. Uh, However, I totally get what you mean. Is it's like I think I saw the second one two times, and I've only seen them in theaters. Can't watch them at home. It's not the same kind of experience. It's not the same awe factor, and it's not the spectacle experience. What is interesting about the Avatar films is that they are the pure spectacle aspect of Hollywood, of what it was during the 1950s, of your epics like Ben-Hur or the Ten Commandments, or even in the 60s of Lawrence Arabia. It's pure, just like scale of everything. Even in like 2001, too, it's just the scale of everything is just so breathtaking and just so like, how could this, how is this done? Um, and I think it's more or less tapping into that, but it's also tapping into mythology too. It's tapping into, cowboys and Indians in space. It's dances and wolves in space. I mean, it's very, and then the second, I haven't seen the third one yet. I would like to, just because I want to see, I want to see how much the technology has advanced in the past, 3 years or so. But at the same time, too, it's such an accessible thing universally that I think that's each one has grossed $1 billion every time that he stepped out and went to bat for it is because he knows the visual aspect of it is going to capture people's imaginations and put them somewhere else for 3.5 hours. That's going to be far more interesting than what's going on in their life, at least for that afternoon or for that evening or for that day that they're gonna like be transported into another world. And I think that's kind of what those movies do so well is they literally transport you into another world. It truly is a window into another world, which is what I loved about the depth of everything, the perspective of everything. Um, and I think it really sells that. And I, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. There's a place for that, especially now. I mean, it's a completely different landscape, 15 years later from what it or 16 years later from 2009, you know, for the theatrical release. I mean, just like with Top Gun, Maverick, it saved theaters, and I think Avatar is saving theaters again, you know, along with that and some, you know, some other Disney films as well that got released this year. I don't know, it's a interesting time for theatrical releases. I honestly think theaters should just and studios should just release their older films that people weren't able to see in, you know, that weren't old enough or weren't born yet to see in theaters. I think those are great. I think Regal did that. And over the summertime, they released a bunch of classic or showed a bunch of classic films that people, you know, love from the 90s and even from the 80s, and I think even some from like the 40s. So I think theaters should do that. I think they probably have a lot of good business if they did that because it's such a completely different experience. Like I saw Jaws for the 50th anniversary, and I loved it even more. It's such an amazing, scary, frightening movie on the big screen. Watching it on TV does not do it justice. I was so afraid stepping out of that theater. It was one of the best experiences I've had. And also too, James Cameron, as well as speaking of James Cameron, if you ever get a chance to see Aliens in theaters, go and see it. It's such a badass experience to see with a crowd. It's one of the best, most. I saw it at the Egyptian a couple years ago. They showed it 70 millimeter print. It was gorgeous. So much fun. But anyway, that's what I think. So there is a place for it, and I think there's just not enough of the spectacle anymore in that style to where it's just all comic books. There used to be different genres of spectacle. Now there's only one type of spectacle now, and it's like the superhero, or it's an Avatar, or it's a Disney like animated movie. There used to be so much more spectacle, even with action, with all the genres. So I think we just need to go back to that, you know. Anyway, that's my tangent.
Okay. What do you think, Sam?
Well, I was gonna say I watched Come and See on this computer behind me, and it was like what you were saying. It was that story was so it was just amazing, even though I'm watching it on a 20-inch screen. Um, I love I love the spectacle things. I also like to compose music for my films and stuff, so I kind of cheat and make the music really overbearing to get certain emotions across. But I'm definitely inspired from doing that from like stuff like Dune, like those huge movies where the score and the or the sound design is just like all you can hear, and you leave the theater's ears ringing, or like a Hans Zimmer score from Interstellar or something like that. Like that's the kind of epic spectacle that I love, and I want to make movies like that in the future. And that can only be best replicated in the theater, which is why I'm really excited for the Odyssey.
So yeah, that's one of the different things. One of the things. Oh, you wanted to say something, Jen?
Yeah, I was just gonna follow up because of you know, like I know I kind of chimed in a little early, but I'm glad that you've seen Come and See. Great movie, amazing film, absolutely stunning film. Um, and I agree. I think that also like you know there are a lot of local nonprofit theaters that are doing just what David said of like showing older films. I got a chance to see Barry Gordy's The Last Dragon in December, and the director Michael Schultz was there, and it was so cool. I got to see Hollywood Shuffle, and Robert Townsend was in attendance. This is all at Vidiot's in Eagle Rock. If anybody's ever on the east side, go to Vidiot's. They have amazing movies. Joe Dante came out for Gremlins. It was so cool. It was amazing, just an amazing to see that film because I remember movie came out whenever I was 7 years old, and so seeing it again on a screen 41 years later was like amazing. Just the like one of like a highlight of my year. And I do think that, you know, there's definitely something to be said about the spectacle and the escapism that, you know, big budget films can provide. I have a lot of thoughts on what happens next for indie film, especially with like the news of Warner Brothers and Netflix now being one, and the short movie theater window that's going to happen. Like I got all kinds of opinions on that. But ultimately, like, I think that we're reaching back into the past to find things anew because we're dissatisfied with what we have now. And I think that that's a travesty. I think it's a tragedy. But I also think, perhaps it's an opportunity for, filmmakers like us who we all sound like we are very dedicated to making cinema over content. And I think that there is windows of opportunity for us to really have our own voices heard and tell stories that we want to share, not just because it's, spectacle, but because we're really trying to affect somebody. We're trying to change somebody's, mind. We're trying to change somebody's life. We're trying to give somebody a brand new thought that they never had before. And, that's kind of what I love about storytelling. And I think that there is something to be said about like the spectacle of it. The spectacle gets butts in the seats, but it's the story that keeps people.
Yes, exactly. And on that tangent, on that topic, sorry, I have one more film, and please just raise your hand if you have seen it. The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. Have you guys seen these movies? Oh, okay. Jen, you're missing out. You have to watch it, or we're not going to be friends anymore.
Okay, sorry, apologies. I will put it on my list immediately. It's been on my radar. I just have not had a chance to see it. I apologize. I'm probably too busy watching like weird Gaspar Noé stuff.
Oh, geez, why?
Because I love the way he edits and the way that like his edits is insane. And not only that, what I love about Gaspar Noé is that he has no fear of making the audience uncomfortable in so many ways. And I
Um,
gotta respect that. It's so cool.
uncomfortable is a generous word you're using for that guy.
You, you
Honestly,
know,
it's
I gotta.
traumatizing sometimes, dude.
Exactly, and I think that that is cinema. I think that that is still cinema.
Oh God.
I had a year whenever I was. This is a long story, but like whenever I was younger, I was in chemotherapy for cancer, and I couldn't go anywhere. And my dad loved directors' commentaries, and I love directors' commentary. So I watched every single director's commentary I could get my hands on. I think I told you this, Abby, a while back. And Gaspar Noé does have some commentaries that are translated into English. And so watching how like he would make some of these movies, I was just fascinated by it. Like, and I watched some really uncomfortable films, 120 Days of Sodom or Salo. I watched Cannibal Holocaust. I watched, Taxidermia. I watched all of these movies that like there's no reason for somebody that's like for somebody to watch these movies if they want to sleep at night.
Yeah.
And they're just amazing, amazing films, and it's so uncomfortable. They're so uncomfortable, but I
Yeah.
think that that trauma, like, really does it affected me, and I have to like I've got to pay homage to that. I've got to be like,
Okay.
okay, why
Okay.
did why did the Serbian film break me in
Uh,
ways that I didn't want to be broken? And like, geez, oh my God. But then again, you see like Old Boy, the original Old Boy, and it's still in that vein. It just doesn't push it as in the same way. So like I love Gaspar Noé. I thought that like Irreversible is the most brutal film I think I've ever watched, but at the same time, the ending is absolutely beautiful and heartbreaking. And I love that.
okay. Sam, don't Google it right now. Don't Google any of this right now. I'm looking at you. You're Googling it. Don't Google any
I'm
of that.
Googling it. Oh my gosh.
That's really funny. Yeah, no, it's not. Don't watch it with your parents.
I won't.
Don't watch it with your
No.
parents, or watch it with your parents and just don't let them know what they're
um,
getting into because that could be funny.
Oh
No.
my gosh.
Please. I saw that. Please don't. Honestly, no, but you brought up a good point. Like, there's a limit of everything, right? There's one thing becomes exploitative and one thing's become piece of art. Like, for example, A Clockwork Orange. It can easily become an exploitative movie because I don't know, Jen, but yeah, all the movies that you mentioned are it's we cannot say it's part of humanity because it's part of society. There are people like that who do sorts of things, but we just don't want to talk about it. I get that, but yeah, I guess I guess it's my take, and feel free to disagree, all of you guys, but uh, I think we do go to cinema to have some escape, and sometimes it can be painful, sad, but yeah, those things take out some part of you that you don't want to see. I think it reflects on something on your humanity in a way, which is a weird word that you really don't want to see. And I guess that's why it is exploitative.
Well, like just to follow up on that, like I watch those because I really, I had never had the opportunity to experience films that like made me feel that way. And then once I felt it once, I was like, okay, all right, what is this? What is this type of film? What is this type of cinema? And so I totally under personal line, really. Right. So following up with what I was saying, Avi, like I think that you had mentioned that like when does something become exploitative and when does it art? And I think that that's a line for an audience to kind of decide and sometimes. But I also think that we, it's really interesting because case in point, yesterday I was on the phone with a documentary filmmaker named Jacob Young, and he made a film in 1984. And they had to like make a little boy look like he was going out of a window, and in 84 they were like, all right, we're just gonna take some like breakable glass, and they put the little boy's head through the glass. Right, you can't do that now, that would be totally unsafe. And at the time he was like, we didn't know what else to do. And so it's time, place, but also like what your moral standing is at the time. But more to the point, we were talking about, films like the films of like Gaspar Noé and his first film, Carne, like within the first 3 minutes, they shoot a horse in the head and it falls dead and you see it right there. It's like the very first thing you see. And it struck me as like very exploitative. It struck me as very like, so visceral. And yet at the same time, I had never seen it before. I had never seen that thing before. I had never, watching Cannibal Holocaust, they killed live animals on camera for that film. And it's gross and it's disgusting. But at the same time, like it was a found footage film and it lives in its infamy because of that. And we talk about it culturally because of it. So is that art? It's a really interesting question to ask, you know?
Huh. Kind of going on that, you know, exploitation or just art in general. I mean, I think the news is exploitive, you know. I think I think that's something in itself that is just quite, I don't know, I don't like it. And, same thing with true crime stuff. I mean, that's a huge business and that makes a bunch of money, whether it's a podcast or the first, a Dateline or that all the big crime things that are happening, especially like even like with Rob Reiner and his wife and his son and everything. That's going to be turned into a movie. I mean, Ryan Murphy's probably working on something right now. uh, I mean, because he did the Menendez brothers. He did he did OJ. He did what else did he do? He did Ed Gein. I haven't seen the Ed Gein thing, but I heard he did some crazy shit with that. Excuse my language, but um, I don't like it. But I think there's also the aspect of it, which I agree with Jan, is that there's art in it, and then there's like the exploitation side of it. But there's a cross, there's a crossroads where they meet, and you're like, oh, they're not trying to be exploitive. They're trying to be informative in a way to show a different perception or a different point of view or something that's far far different than what you went into that film or that show than you were before, and you're a different person because of it. because you saw something that was different, you saw something that wasn't expected, and it's just like geez, like documentaries. I think documentaries are kind of interesting in that way. Like especially Werner Herzog documentaries are kind of that way. There's a documentary called Dear Zachary, A Letter to a Son. I highly recommend uh, people to go see that. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but that's like one of the most heartbreaking films I've ever seen. And I don't think it could be seen as exploitive, but at the same time thing, I think it's coming from a true, heartfelt place. And it just reveals things that are just like, whoa, this is if this happens to this, if it happened to this family, it's happened to other families. And yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, because story, fiction imitates life. It's commenting on life, and then there are times where art is or life is art. I don't, in some aspects. I mean, because it's like everybody's life now and how content is an art form. As much as maybe we might not like it, but it is turned into an art form, and people are making money off of their life and exploiting their own life, exploiting other people. I mean, reality TV. I mean, going all the way back to Survivor being a huge thing in the early 2000s, and that evolving into other things too. More benign things like HGTV, trading places, doing that kind of stuff. But then you have just, what it was, The Hills or Agora Hill. I don't know that TV show. You have the Kardashians. You have Real Housewives. Who knows how many? And you have 90 Day Fiance, which is there's a whole multiverse of that. There's so many damn shows of that. Um, yeah, it's just I don't know. I think that's exploitive, but it's exploitive in a different kind of way. Um,
I totally agree with you, Dave. I totally agree with you because like they're not neither one are monolithic, right? They both can kind of feed into the other. I remember there was a photographer, I can't remember her name, but she took photos of there was a brothel that she lived right next door to, and she was taking photographs of these women without their permission and totally like you like in very like different situations and things like that, and then published it as a book, made money off of it, and it was considered art. Was she exploiting these women and their clientele? It's very possible. I mean, honestly, yes, she's totally exploiting. Is it still art? Yes, I think that art kind of like lives on that fringe of exploitative in some way, shape, or form. I mean, I feel like I'm exploiting PAs sometimes that are like students because they're getting like, I like, oh my gosh, you poor thing. That's why I treat PAs like gold. I adore those people. They're amazing. But at the same time, like, I think that, they're, your exploitation is unfortunately a part of the process, and it's really good to be aware of, right? I think that if you're aware of it and you're trying to make that exploitation not the feature of what you're trying to make, unless it is like there are, I was just listening to a podcast yesterday that was a great podcast about, filmmakers that like had basically made narrative films that were based off of real things that had happened in a journalistic sense. And, they had to interview and get to know these subjects, and then they would use that story to tell the narrative story of it, to dramatize it. Are they exploiting them? Possibly. Did the people like what they saw that was, the narrative version of their lives? Did that make them uncomfortable or feel taken advantage of? Very possible. But, I also think that those stories that are now dramatized, you are showing that character, that person, that story in a light that otherwise we'd only see from a news story, which is going to be its own form of exploitation. And I totally agree with, true crime. There are prisoners that are in, prison right now that their faces are plastered all over true crime, and they don't get to speak for themselves. And I'm not saying that what anybody did is good or bad, but that's just the fact of the matter.
I would I would like my perspective on it is like, yeah, I think you guys bring up some great points, but like when you're talking about the Cannibal Holocaust, is that what it's called? In my opinion, art is generative. I don't think destruction is art. I think it's awful. Um, and like that for me, like I would never want to make something like that. I want to make something that's good, uplifting, even if there are themes of bad things happening, but I wouldn't want to actually cause that in a real sense. Um, I think you can get it across without having to cause real damage. I think there's enough of that already in the world. So for me, at least, I don't know what you guys think, but I think art is supposed to be creating. Even if you're talking about those PAs, they're building skills, they're building connections, you know. Yeah, they're probably getting overworked a little bit, but they are gaining something from it, even if, you know, it's a little exploitative. So it's definitely gets interesting when you're talking about those people that were interviewed though, for those narrative films. Like for me, I think I am very, I do not like horror films. It's just not my thing. And especially when it comes to the Terrifier movies. Oh my gosh. I've just, you know, out of morbid curiosity that I think every young boy has, I was looking up those scenes and all that. And I was just like retching. Like, I'm like, this is disgusting. Why would you want to watch this? Why would you want to subject yourself to like this evil, like incarnate thing? And it's just like, I think hearing all this, it's just a matter of personal preference and obviously how I grew up and stuff like that. That I would never want to bring that into the world. I would rather bring out those good things.
I think it's interesting. Um, I think for me, when I was younger, I think I sought out that type of stuff. I wanted to, I don't know, it's an interesting kind of thing. I love watching making of like films. Like when I was a kid, I loved watching the making of Jurassic Park or the making of Return of the Jedi or even making of Terminator 2. I loved seeing the process of it, and in a lot of ways, um, and I even worked at a makeup effects house. For a year and some change. Gabe Bartalos, he did Leprechaun. He did what else? He worked with Rick Baker. He worked on Basket Case 2. I think he worked on Texas Chain Massacre or Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Um, yeah, he did all the Leprechaun movies too. But it's such an interesting fascination with me on knowing how how the product's made, and then seeing how it shows up on film and seeing all the disgusting stuff or the things or everything. I don't know. It's just it's like the craftsmanship of the whole thing because it's from nothing and there's reference photos and there's other things that these that the sculptors and the painters and the mold makers have to understand and kind of see the making ups of all this stuff. Um, all the gruesomeness of it, but it's that level of detail and that level of dedication to make something as real as possible show up on screen. And what's interesting is you see that stuff in person, and it's like, wow, this looks fake. But then when you see it on screen or through the monitor, it looks real. Because the more detail there is, the better it shows up on camera. Having all this to say, um, life is very much, ups and downs kind of thing. But there are instances in our lives where we feel that tension throughout the entire day, or sometimes it's for weeks, or sometimes we feel depressed for a really long time and we can't shake it, or sometimes everything's going really well and we're feeling that. So I think it just depends on the film and what the filmmakers trying to get across when they thought of or what they were going through, and then they exercise those demons or exercise that feeling out on the page. And which is why I love Taxi Driver. I think that's one of my favorite all-time films and has been for a really long time, is because of where Paul Schrader was at that time period of being depressed. He was, squatting in his ex-girlfriend or ex-wife's house. He didn't talk to anybody for 2 weeks or something like that. He had like a stomach problem or an ulcer, and he went to the hospital, and he realized, like, I haven't talked to anybody in 2 weeks or a month or whatever it was. And so he wrote Taxi Driver as a metaphor for depression. And I think a lot of films are done in that kind of way. It's just like, what are they exercising from themselves to get out into the world? Because if they're feeling it, then there's bound to be other people that are feeling it too. Um, so I think that's kind of like an interesting way. I mean, another film by Paul Schrader and Scorsese, Bringing Out the Dead, based off of EMT driver or ambulance driver in Hell's Kitchen, New York during the 1980s, early 90s. That's all some real stuff, visceral things going on in there. And I don't know, it spoke to me. It spoke to me in a lot of different ways. Kind of going back on that, of why it spoke to me, there was a triple homicide next door when I was growing up in the San Fernando Valley. We just moved into this house. There was a party next door. Some guy got really drunk and shot three people. And the next day, I remember seeing one of the bodies in the alleyway, and that really affected me. And kind of left an imprint on me of, like, I don't know, like a morbid curiosity or morbid kind of thing in me that made me seek out those types of, darker kind of themes and elements that have kind of been persistent throughout all of my work. And me trying to rationalize, mortality or death or life in an interest in many different kinds of ways. But it all stems from like that, like a very, I don't know, a foundation of some sort of what my taste is, creatively, and kind of letting it out and exercising it in a different kind of way. So I think people do seek out those types of things, whether it's really dark stuff, really gory things, depressing films, action fueled films. I mean, comedy, whatever it is, like wanting to be living in that space for a bit because, maybe you're just feeling that way, or maybe you're trying to get out of a different kind of mindset that, you want to kind of exercise it, visually or in a shared experience, which I think is one of the great things about the theater going experience is, like, when you get in a room of people who are wanting a certain type of, like, be entertained in a certain kind of way, you're all going to vibe off of each other, and you're all going to feel a collective energy of excitement or fear or, mystery or wonder or whatnot. So I think that's one of the great things, is seeing a really good film, a really good movie in the theater. It just kind of brings all that out. So hope that
Totally
answers
agree.
the question.
Totally agree. I will say, like, there's two things that, like, I wanted to, like, kind of say in response to both what Sam and Dave said. Um, like I said, I had mentioned that, like, I went through chemotherapy because I had cancer. This happened whenever I was 18, 19. I had lost my mom at 16. And so I've kind of always had a very different relationship with you know, I guess you could call it morbid, or with, the everything from dark comedy, morbidity, whenever you've kind of looked death in the face a few times, you kind of get to know it a little bit differently. And I think that there's a maturity that's forced upon you that that other folks that have never experienced that aren't able to really understand. You're able to handle darker things, or even may even develop a sense of taste towards, like, the darker aspects of cinema. And so I think that there's something to be said about, how your life experiences really affect your taste. What you experience in your life as you grow will definitely affect your taste, because there are films that, like, whenever I was a kid, couldn't stand. Didn't I was like, why would anybody want to watch this? And now I go back and see them and I'm like, man, I identify with this specific thing, or oh God, no, 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 no. Like you take Salo, 120 Days of Sodom. That's a movie about fascism. That is a movie about the horrors and horrors of fascism. It was so hard to watch, but I made myself do it because I knew I needed to understand the road that it would take one down if you were truly, a fascist living in the that period of time in Italy. I also kind of wanted to push back a little bit on Sam's idea that, art and destruction, because I think that there is absolutely art that can be found in destruction. I think absolutely you can find art in destruction. I think you can find art in death. I think we've seen this in like many different experimental artists throughout the millennia of time, where we have seen things that are dead. Think about Baudelaire and the way he describes like a sex worker's corpse rotting in the street, and it's the way he describes it, like the art is just like gorgeous, but at the same time it makes me deeply uncomfortable. But I cannot deny that I'm like, wow, I have never thought about it that way. What a wild way of describing such a horrific scene. I think about those things, and I think this is why it's really also important to really read so much. Read everything. Things that make you uncomfortable, you should read, especially if you are going to really kind of develop your taste. Would I make, a Cannibal Holocaust or 120 Days of Sodom? No. Although I think that what, they did in Salo was really, meant to affect you in such a way that it terrifies you. But I also think that there's a lot of exploitation that happened in like a film like Cannibal Holocaust. Also, if you've never looked up the story of what happened to the director after he made that movie, it's so interesting that he had to go to court to prove that he didn't kill somebody. Right? Like he literally had to go to court to prove that he didn't impale a woman on a long spike. Like, and he brought the woman with him. Like it's a wild thing. And therein is the art. Like he made everybody think that he had actually done this. And it really kind of like it just stunned me that like what was really capable, what somebody could really be capable of that. That being said, what I make, I just made a historical satirical musical. And at the same time, I'm writing a play right now that is about a Christo-fascist state, and it gets really, really bad. And I have to destroy the perfect idea of what this country is in order to achieve that. And that's where you find the art in it. I've seen many, many works of art that were burned because they weren't not meant to last. And even in that burning, that destruction, there is art. And that's the really sometimes like whether it's intentional or unintentional, I don't think that art is always intentional. I don't know. I love this conversation because again, I like thinking about thinking while I'm thinking.
I'd like to, when I was talking about the destruction thing, yeah, absolutely art in destruction. I think he was mentioning just like going around killing pigs and recording it, calling that art.
Yeah,
Um,
he killed a monkey. He chopped up the top of a head of a monkey. He killed a sea turtle and he killed a tarantula
yeah, yeah,
in
yeah,
real life. I totally don't agree with that. There's definitely better ways that you can do it, but
exactly.
the film itself is a found footage film. It was the very first found footage film, and this is that later inspired found footage films like Blair Witch Project and things like that. And so he was trying to keep it to the realness of what would be actually caught on footage and stuff like that. And I hate the loss of life in any way, shape, or form, but I also understand what he was trying to achieve, but also hate the loss of life.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I was saying. I don't think the actual act of that violence is art in itself, but whatever he's trying to portray or the idea he's trying to give to you, that is art. But yeah, I don't think a murderer is an artist. I think they're a terrible, terrible human being.
But Jan brought up an interesting point about subtext because sometimes, well, it happens to me, and please share your experience with that. Like sometimes when you put the subtext first, it just kills off all the story that you're trying to make. And most of the time, the best approach to get some subtext out there is not to think about it much. Because most of the time, if I'm thinking about a lot of subtext and I'm not saying there's not a theme. You cannot make a movie on a theme, but when you think about a lot of subtext, it it loses the storytelling and everything part of it in some way. Does that resonate with any of you guys?
Oh yeah, totally. I think that subtext, it's good to know as much as you can about the subtext that you're providing the audience through, whether that be through genre, whether that be through camera, whether that be through performance, whether that be through blocking, staging, all of those things. I think it's really important to know that and be deeply involved in the process of understanding what that is, what it could be. But I also totally agree that sometimes on the day, you throw that all away and you might create whole new subtext that you didn't even realize was there. I think that there's benefits to both. It's like there's the conversation I was just having with a writer friend about doing a lot of outlining and a lot of outlining and then only having a very specific script, or doing like a vomit draft where you're just putting everything on it, you're just vomiting it all out because you just got to get it out and then you go back and edit it later. And I think that, in some ways you are, whenever you're doing that vomit draft, you were discovering new subtext. And I think in whenever you're doing a much more methodical draft, you are, through that outline, really honing in on the subtext, so the subtext is clear and you don't have to discover it because you've already done that work in the thought and in the development. I think that there's benefits to both and downfalls to both, or, you can get so caught up in the process that, you've thought so much about the subtext that you wind up losing the subtext you're trying to achieve. And I think that also whenever you're going through, like, the example of a vomit draft, for example, that you may have absolutely no subtext, because you're trying to throw all these ideas in at once, thinking that subtext will just magically appear, and it doesn't.
Yeah, yeah, I think when it comes to subtext, I try and think it as the in the most simplest way. And a lot of the way that I do it is actually through the names of the characters. That's kind of like the first layer of subtext that I have is the names of the characters. And the names of the characters kind of reflect in terms of what their position is, um, mythically within the story. Um, I love myth. I love Joseph Campbell, Hero with a Thousand Faces, um, because it's such a universal thing that has been tried and true that I just try. I do that in a lot of my work, especially recent work, wanting to get that across. And sometimes as John was saying, you can throw it all out, you can throw it all out, and on the day that you're shooting the scene or scenes, that you discover it, you discover something more, or you know somebody else, whether it's in your crew or your actors, will come up with something or say something, hey, this goes kind of along with this, is this what you were thinking? And you're saying, huh, that's that's actually really a good idea, or that I didn't think of it from that point of view. And, you know, I think I think subtext sometimes is just comes after the fact. Sometimes, at least for me, um, after after writing it, or at least coming up with the initial draft, it'll come afterwards, and you're like, oh, this went a way that I didn't expect it to, and is always fun. I try and approach it now recently as well, kind of approaching it from like a Kubrick point of view, because I think his films are full of subtext, and You can, but also that's the great thing about artwork too, is you can draw something that maybe wasn't intentional, but you discover on your own. So I think it kind of depends.
I think a lot of times it's something I'm trying to get better at for sure. Because in the beginning, it's kind of you just want to make stuff, you want to get it out into the world and get on a roll. But a lot of times I like to just make it the physical space or physical objects on screen, and maybe it doesn't always have to do with what they're talking about. For example, I have a script where there's this guy, he likes painting clouds, um, but he's stuck at a dead end job as a dishwasher in this tiny cube. So he's surrounded by water, which makes clouds, but it's all running down a drain, and he can't see the sky. It's very small and enclosed, and that just speaks to my experience of like wanting to get out of my hometown, but having to kind of wait for a better opportunity. So stuff like that, like maybe necessarily not necessarily the dialogue or the characters aren't um, directed towards that. They might have a different goal. In the like the story might have a different goal, but something along those lines of you get the feeling that this is what this is trying to represent. I'm trying to get better at it though, so it's a work in progress for sure.
I wanted to touch base on what Dave said about Joseph Campbell. If you haven't gotten a chance to read his student's book, The Heroine's Journey by Maureen Murdoch, I highly recommend it. It is a very interesting take on how the hero's journey isn't quite sufficient enough for the female protagonist, and it's a really interesting read. I really enjoyed that. But I think that, absolutely subtext is, you know, again, it's genre dependent. It is dependent on so much of the story that you're telling. I also use name as well. I've got a play that I wrote that is very much like it uses philosopher names in order to, for me, I use it at first for me to clue in like who this person is, what they represent, and the philosophy it represents. And by using a philosopher name, I'm not using their last name, just like the philosopher's first name. It clues me into whether or not this character is perhaps a nihilist. Like I've got a character named Fred, who is a vehicle for like Friedrich Nietzsche's kind of like ideas of nihilism. I've got a character named Art, who is representative of Arthur Schopenhauer and the idea of will as idea. I've got a character named Simone that is like Simone de Beauvoir and her ethics of ambiguity, as well as her views on feminism as she wrote it in The Second Sex, which is a fantastic book. Very, very long read, very, very hard, long read. But I think that, I love starting with kind of like the name, like you said, Dave. I really love that idea. It's something that I do myself. And I also think that subtext is, as a director, not just thinking about what's on the page, but what's on the screen. Subtext is in blocking. It is so dependent on blocking at times. And I think that that is something that, like, as a director, I constantly am trying to work on to be better at too.
Like one of the best blockings, and I think you guys will chime on that, is in Silence of the Lambs. Have you guys all seen Silence of the Lamb? Oh, you
Yeah.
haven't? Okay. For
Absolutely. Fantastic movie. Jonathan Demme does so much great work in that film. I love that
yeah.
movie.
Okay, so since Sam hasn't seen it, but so for example, no, in Harry Potter movie, have you seen all the Harry Potter, Sam?
I'll be honest, I don't like watching that many movies, but I know the Harry Potter storyline, so you
Oh,
can you can say any of that and I'll be okay.
no, but it's more if you see the first King Kong movie in 1960s, if they made it, or 1950s.
1930,
90,
1933.
is it right after Civil Rights Movement?
The original King
No,
Kong?
no, the original King Kong was way before civil rights. It's like
Yeah, way
35
before.
years beforehand. I
Yeah.
would just, I would say that like, has anybody seen 12 Angry Men, the Sidney
Yes,
Lumet version?
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's an example of a lens plot and blocking put together, right? If you get a chance, Sam, I highly recommend watch this on the biggest screen you can and watch it twice. Watch it the first time, like anybody who hasn't seen this movie should watch it the first time and just let the movie take over you. And then go through it the second time and watch how the camera works as a stage and he creates a lens plot where it starts wide at the beginning of the film, very high and wide, and as the film progresses, it gets tighter and tighter and tighter to make you feel like you're claustrophobic. Not only that, you look at how he blocks these 12 men, these 12 characters, which is insane to try and block 12 characters around a table and make it interesting. And yet Sidney Lumet does it with such style and grace. It's insane. It is.
First film too.
Yeah, I know. You're right on. And just what a genius way of blocking so that you are constantly in the know of where the power dynamic is, where the characters are moving from one to the other, who's got the upper hand, who looks like they've got the upper hand but doesn't, and also who's still, who's not moving.
And so it was an amazing conversation to have with you guys. It was really wonderful to talk about all sorts of things with each and every one of you, and I learned a lot from this conversation. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, welcome.
Yeah,
I
of
learned
course.
so much about, different ways of thinking about like how to work with, everything from gangster film breakdowns and things like that. I really appreciated Dave and Sam.
Yeah, I really appreciate learning from these two older guys. A lot of experience here that I can
Hey,
dig into and learn from.
It was a pleasure. It was an honor. I love talking with filmmakers and just different perspectives. It's such a great time. I could talk to all of you guys for hours, hours and hours. I mean, I had a great time. I'd love to do a part two of this or part three or whatever. It'd be awesome.
yeah, we can make it a part eight if you want to. I really don't care. But yeah, and also Sam, we're not old, okay? We're mature.
I like to call myself young at heart.
Yes, you're old,
Oh, you
Sam.
definitely are. Oh yeah. I know I'm real old.
Okay. So that's thank you very much, guy, for giving me such time and for the editing and everything. Okay, and cut.
Please, 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 I'm begging you, please. I'm desperate. I don't know what to do. Please subscribe. Like, comment, and subscribe. Subscribe for more content.